My parents convinced everyone my brother was mentally unstable to hide the fact that they knew our uncle was abusing him. So when I found his hidden evidence and exposed their cover-up, they begged me not to press charges because it would hurt their image more than their son's. My family situation has been messed up for years, but I, 19F, just discovered something that changes everything I thought I knew. This is about my older brother Hector, 22M, and my younger brother Ryan, 16M. Our parents are Carol, 45F, and Dennis, 48M. We also have our dad's brother Uncle Pete, 52M, who's been living with us on and off for the past few years. Hector has always been the problem child in our family, or at least that's what our parents have told everyone for as long as I can remember. When I was around 10 years old, things started getting really bad with him. He would have these angry outbursts, he'd skip school, and he started getting into fights. My parents said he was acting out because he was jealous of Ryan, who was always the smart one, the athletic one, the one who got good grades without trying. The breaking point came when I was 13. Hector had been acting stranger than usual. He would barely eat dinner with us, he'd lock himself in his room for hours, and whenever Uncle Pete came over, Hector would get this look on his face like he was going to be sick. One night, I heard shouting from downstairs. I crept to the top of the stairs and saw Hector screaming at our parents, saying something about how they needed to believe him and that Uncle Pete was a liar. Dad was yelling back, telling Hector to stop making up stories to get attention. The next morning, Hector was gone. Mom sat Ryan and me down and explained that Hector had been sent to a military boarding school because his behavior had gotten out of control. She said he had been making false accusations against Uncle Pete, trying to cause trouble in the family because he was jealous that Uncle Pete and Dad were close. She told us Hector needed structure and discipline, and that this was the best thing for everyone. I believed them. Hector had been acting weird, and my parents seemed genuinely concerned about his well-being. Uncle Pete had always been nice to me and Ryan. He would bring us gifts when he visited, help with homework, and take us to movies when our parents were busy. He seemed like a normal uncle. Hector was at the boarding school for 8 months. When he came back, he was completely different. The brother I remembered was loud and funny, always making jokes and playing pranks. The person who came home was quiet and kept his head down. He barely spoke to any of us, and when he did, it was just basic responses. Mom said the school had helped him mature and learn respect. But there were things that didn't make sense. Hector would flinch whenever Dad raised his voice, even slightly. He stopped eating meals with us, always making excuses about homework or not being hungry. And whenever Uncle Pete came over, Hector would disappear upstairs and not come back down until Pete left. I tried talking to Hector a few times, but he would just change the subject or walk away. Once, I asked him directly if he was okay, and he looked at me for a long time before saying that sometimes the truth doesn't matter if nobody wants to hear it. I didn't understand what he meant then. Things got worse when Uncle Pete moved in with us permanently 2 years ago. He had lost his job and was going through a divorce, so Dad offered him our guest room. Hector's reaction was immediate. He started having what Mom called anxiety attacks. He would lock his door at night, and sometimes I could hear him moving furniture around, like he was barricading himself in. Mom and Dad said Hector was having trouble adjusting to having another adult in the house, and that his military school experience had made him paranoid and antisocial. They started talking about sending him back to boarding school or maybe to a facility that could help with his mental health issues. Around this time, I noticed Hector started leaving things for Ryan and me. Little notes in our backpacks with phone numbers for helplines, or pamphlets about staying safe that he must have gotten from somewhere. When Mom found one of these in Ryan's folder, she confronted Hector about it. She accused him of trying to scare his younger siblings and said he was being manipulative. The final incident happened 6 months ago. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and heard voices downstairs. I thought maybe someone had left the TV on, but as I got closer to the stairs, I realized it was Uncle Pete and Hector talking. Pete's voice was low and threatening, and Hector sounded scared. I couldn't make out most of what they were saying, but I heard Pete say something about keeping his mouth shut and remembering what happened last time Hector tried to cause trouble. I went back to my room without using the bathroom. The next morning, Hector had a black eye. Mom said he had fallen down the stairs in the dark. Hector didn't say anything about it. 2 weeks later, Hector moved out. He said he had found a job and an apartment across town and that he needed to be independent. Mom and Dad seemed relieved. They said it was good that Hector was finally taking responsibility for his life instead of causing drama at home. But Hector didn't just move out. He stopped coming to family dinners, he didn't show up for Ryan's birthday, and he barely responded to texts. When I asked Mom about it, she said Hector was probably still dealing with his issues and that we should give him space. Last month, something happened that made me start questioning everything. Ryan came home from school upset. He said a kid in his class had been asking weird questions about our family, specifically about Uncle Pete. When Ryan told Mom about it, she got really angry and said the other kids' parents were probably spreading gossip. But that night, I heard Mom and Dad having a heated conversation in their room. I couldn't hear details, but Dad sounded worried, and Mom kept saying they needed to stick to their story. The next day, Uncle Pete was gone. Mom said he had found a new job in another state and had to leave suddenly. But his stuff was still in the guest room, and his car was still in our driveway for 3 more days before someone came to pick it up. I started thinking about all the weird things that had happened over the years. Hector's behavior, the things he had said, the way he reacted to Uncle Pete, and now Pete's sudden disappearance. I decided to reach out to Hector directly. I went to his apartment last week. He was surprised to see me, but he let me in. His place was small but clean, and he seemed to be doing okay. I told him I was confused about what had been going on with the family, and I asked him to tell me the truth about why he had been so upset about Uncle Pete. Hector was quiet for a long time. Then he asked me if I really wanted to know, because once he told me, I couldn't unknow it. I said yes. Hector told me that Uncle Pete had been inappropriate with him starting when Hector was 14. It started small, with Pete making comments about Hector's body or finding excuses to touch him. Then it escalated. Pete would come into Hector's room at night when our parents were asleep. He told Hector that if he ever said anything, nobody would believe him because Pete was Dad's favorite brother and Hector was already seen as a troublemaker. When Hector finally tried to tell our parents, they accused him of lying to get attention. Pete had apparently told them that Hector was acting out because he was jealous of the relationship Pete had with Dad, and that Hector might even try to make false accusations to cause problems. Our parents believed Pete completely. Hector said the boarding school wasn't about discipline. It was about getting him out of the house so Pete could continue living there without Hector causing problems. The 8 months away weren't therapeutic, they were just time for everyone to forget about Hector's accusations so he could come back and keep quiet. When Pete moved in permanently, Hector couldn't handle being in the same house anymore. He had tried leaving notes and information for Ryan and me because he was worried Pete might target us next, especially Ryan. But every time he tried to warn us, our parents saw it as more evidence that Hector was unstable and manipulative. Hector showed me a box he had been keeping in his closet. Inside were photos of bruises, a journal where he had documented incidents, and a small recording device. He said he had started recording conversations with Pete after he moved back from boarding school, hoping to get proof that our parents would believe. He played one of the recordings for me. It was Pete's voice, clearly threatening Hector and talking about how nobody would believe Hector's word against his. In the background, you could hear our TV playing a show I remembered watching that night months ago. I sat in Hector's apartment for 2 hours, listening to more recordings and reading through his journal entries. Everything made sense now. Hector's behavior, his fear, his desperation to protect Ryan and me, and our parents' refusal to listen to him. I asked Hector why he had never shown this evidence to anyone else. He said he had tried once, taking some of it to a teacher at school, but the teacher had called our parents. Mom and Dad had convinced the teacher that Hector was having mental health issues and was creating elaborate stories for attention. After that, Hector realized that our parents had already poisoned any potential support system against him. When I got home that night, I looked at our family differently. Dad was watching TV with Ryan, and Mom was doing laundry. They looked like normal parents doing normal things, but now I knew they had sacrificed their oldest son to protect their reputation and their relationship with Uncle Pete. I haven't said anything to them yet. I don't know what to do with this information. Hector made me promise not to confront them until we figure out the best way to handle it, especially since Ryan is still a minor and still living in the house. But I keep thinking about all the times I believed our parents when they said Hector was the problem. All the times I didn't text him back because I thought he was being dramatic. All the family events he missed because he couldn't be in the same house as Uncle Pete, while we talked about how Hector was too selfish to care about family. I don't know how to move forward from here. My parents, who I trusted completely, have been lying to me for years. My brother, who I thought was troubled and difficult, was actually trying to protect me and Ryan while dealing with something horrible on his own. The worst part is that I can see how calculated it all was. They sent Hector away when he tried to speak up, they painted him as mentally unstable when he came back, and they made sure that any attempt he made to warn Ryan and me looked like manipulation. They protected their image and their relationship with Uncle Pete at the cost of their son's safety and well-being. I'm not sure what I'm looking for by posting this. Maybe just somewhere to put these thoughts while I figure out what to do next. Hector and I are meeting again this weekend to talk about our options. He's worried about Ryan, and so am I, even though Uncle Pete is gone now. Has anyone else dealt with a situation where they discovered their family had been lying about something this serious? I feel like everything I thought I knew about my childhood was wrong. Update 1. A lot has happened since my original post, and I need to update everyone who gave me advice and support. Thank you to everyone who encouraged me to take action and who shared their own stories. After my last post, Hector and I met several more times to plan how to handle the situation. We decided that our first priority was making sure Ryan was safe, and our second priority was getting some kind of justice for what Hector had endured. Hector had been in contact with a lawyer for the past year, someone who specialized in cases like his. The lawyer had told him that the recordings and documentation he had collected could be useful, but that the case would be stronger if we could find evidence that our parents had knowingly covered up Pete's behavior. The lawyer suggested that we try to get our parents to admit what they knew, possibly by recording a conversation where we confronted them with the evidence. Hector was hesitant about this approach because he was worried about putting me in danger, but I convinced him that I could handle it. We planned for me to approach our parents when Ryan was at school and Hector would wait nearby in case things went wrong. I was supposed to start by asking general questions about why Hector had really been sent away, and then gradually reveal that I knew more than they thought. But before we could execute this plan, something unexpected happened that changed everything. 2 weeks ago, Ryan came home from school and asked me to come up to his room. He closed the door and asked me if I knew why Hector never came around anymore. I could tell something was bothering him, so I asked what was going on. Ryan told me that he had been having nightmares lately about Uncle Pete. He said the dreams started after Pete moved out, and they were getting worse. In the dreams, Pete was in Ryan's room at night, and Ryan couldn't move or call for help. I asked Ryan if these were just dreams or if something had actually happened. Ryan was quiet for a long time, then he said he wasn't sure anymore. He said there were nights when he would wake up and his bedroom door would be open, even though he always closed it before going to sleep. Sometimes his blankets would be moved around in ways he didn't remember. Ryan said he had never told anyone about this because he thought maybe he was sleepwalking or imagining things. But after Pete left, the dreams got more vivid, and he started remembering things that felt more like memories than dreams. I realized that Hector's worst fears had been true. Pete hadn't just targeted Hector, he had also been doing things to Ryan. And just like with Hector, Ryan had been too confused and scared to say anything. I told Ryan that he wasn't imagining things and that he needed to tell me everything he could remember. Over the next hour, Ryan described several incidents where he had woken up to find Pete in his room, telling him to stay quiet and that this was normal uncle behavior. Pete had convinced Ryan that if he said anything, it would upset Mom and Dad and cause problems for the family. Ryan also told me that Hector had tried to warn him. There were times when Hector would come into Ryan's room late at night to check on him, and Hector had given Ryan a lock for his bedroom door, telling him to use it every night. But when Mom found the lock, she took it away and told Ryan that locking doors was disrespectful to the family. I was furious. Not only had our parents ignored Hector's attempts to get help, but they had actively prevented him from protecting Ryan. They had removed Ryan's ability to keep himself safe because it was more important to them to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. I called Hector immediately and told him what Ryan had said. Hector broke down on the phone. He said he had suspected that Pete might have been targeting Ryan too, but he had hoped that his own presence in the house was enough to keep Pete focused on him instead. We decided that we couldn't wait any longer to confront our parents. That evening, after Ryan went to bed, I sat down with Mom and Dad in the living room. I told them that I knew the truth about Hector and Uncle Pete, and that I knew Pete had also been inappropriate with Ryan. Their reaction told me everything I needed to know. Dad's face went completely white, and Mom started talking immediately, saying that I didn't understand the situation and that Hector had always been a liar who caused trouble for the family. I pulled out my phone and showed them one of the recordings Hector had made. As Pete's voice filled the room, threatening Hector and talking about how no one would believe him, I watched my parents' faces change. Mom started crying and saying that they had tried to handle the situation the best way they could. She said they had believed Pete when he told them that Hector was making things up, and that they didn't realize how serious it was until it was too late. Dad was quieter, but he eventually admitted that they had suspected something might be wrong but that they didn't want to believe it. He said Pete was his brother, and they thought that sending Hector away for a while would give everyone time to cool down and figure things out. I asked them directly if they knew that Pete had been in Ryan's room. Mom said no, but Dad looked uncomfortable. When I pressed him, he admitted that Mom had mentioned finding Ryan's door open some mornings, and that Pete had offered explanations about checking on Ryan because he seemed restless at night. I realized that they had known. Maybe they hadn't wanted to admit it to themselves, but they had known that Pete was dangerous to both of their sons, and they had chosen to protect Pete instead of protecting Hector and Ryan. The conversation lasted for hours. My parents kept trying to justify their actions, saying that they had been trying to keep the family together and that they didn't know how to handle such a serious situation. They said they had been afraid that involving police or other authorities would destroy the family and hurt everyone's reputation. But the more they talked, the clearer it became that their main concern had never been protecting Hector and Ryan. Their main concern had been avoiding scandal and maintaining their relationship with Uncle Pete, who had been providing financial support to our family for years. That's when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Dad had been struggling with debt from some bad business investments, and Pete had been helping pay the mortgage and other bills. Our parents hadn't just chosen Pete over their sons, they had sold their son's safety to keep Pete happy and keep the money coming. At the end of the conversation, I told my parents that Hector and I were going to report everything to the police, and that we were going to make sure Ryan got the help he needed. I also told them that I would be moving out and staying with Hector until we figured out longer-term arrangements. Mom begged me not to involve the police, saying it would destroy what was left of our family. Dad said that Pete was already gone and that dragging everything out into the open would just hurt everyone more. I told them that they had already destroyed our family years ago when they chose to protect a predator instead of their children. I packed a bag and left that night. Ryan is still living at home for now because he's a minor, but Hector and I are working with the lawyer and social services to explore options for getting him into a safer situation. We've also reported everything to the police, and they are investigating. The hardest part of all this is realizing how long our parents had known something was wrong and had chosen to look the other way. Hector suffered for years, thinking that nobody believed him and that he was alone. Ryan was victimized while Hector was away at boarding school, and when Hector came back and tried to protect Ryan, our parents saw it as more evidence that Hector was unstable. I keep thinking about all the signs that were there. Hector's behavior changes, his fear of Pete, his desperate attempts to warn Ryan and me, and our parents' insistence that Hector was the problem. Everything makes sense now, but it's too late to undo the damage that was done. The investigation is ongoing, but the lawyer thinks we have a strong case against Pete if we can locate him. Our parents are also potentially facing charges for child endangerment and failure to report abuse. I don't know what's going to happen to our family. I can't see myself ever having a normal relationship with my parents after this. Hector is doing better now that he doesn't have to carry this secret alone, but he's still dealing with years of trauma and betrayal. Ryan is the one I'm most worried about. He's still processing what happened to him, and he's confused about why our parents didn't protect him. Hector and I are trying to be there for him, but it's complicated because he still has to live with Mom and Dad until we can arrange something else. I wanted to update everyone because so many people gave me good advice and encouragement to take action. This situation is far from over, but at least now the truth is out, and we're working toward getting justice and healing. Update 2. The situation with my family has continued to develop in ways I didn't expect. I want to update everyone who has been following this story and offering support. First, the police investigation has been making progress. They were able to track down Uncle Pete, who had been staying with a friend in another state. When they approached him for questioning, he immediately asked for a lawyer, which the detective said was often a sign that someone knows they're in serious trouble. The detective also told us that Pete had been on their radar before. There had been a complaint filed against him about 10 years ago involving a neighbor's child, but the case had been dropped when the family moved away and didn't want to pursue it. Learning this made Hector even more angry at our parents because it meant Pete had a history that they could have discovered if they had taken Hector's accusations seriously. Hector's recordings and documentation have been crucial to the case. The prosecutor told us that without that evidence, it would have been much harder to prove what had happened, especially since so much time had passed. Hector's foresight in collecting proof likely saved the entire case. But the bigger developments have been with my family situation. 3 weeks ago, Child Protective Services got involved because of Ryan's situation. A social worker came to interview Ryan separately from our parents, and Ryan was able to tell her everything that had happened with Pete. The social worker also discovered some things that even Hector and I hadn't known about. It turns out that Hector's teacher at the boarding school had filed a report with CPS years ago because Hector had told her about the abuse. However, when CPS contacted our parents, Mom and Dad had provided medical records showing that Hector was receiving psychiatric treatment for behavioral problems and delusional thinking. Our parents had actually taken Hector to a psychiatrist after he first accused Pete, but instead of telling the psychiatrist the truth about Hector's accusations, they had told the doctor that Hector was having behavioral issues and making up stories for attention. The psychiatrist, working with false information, had diagnosed Hector with adjustment disorder and recommended therapy for attention-seeking behavior. Our parents then used this diagnosis to discredit Hector with CPS, the school, and anyone else who might have listened to him. It was a deliberate and calculated campaign to make sure Hector would never be believed. When the current social worker reviewed the old files and compared them to the evidence we had provided, she realized what had happened. She told us that this was one of the most systematic cover-ups she had seen in a case involving child protection. The social worker recommended that Ryan be temporarily removed from our parents' custody while the investigation continued. Hector and I had been hoping for this, but we weren't prepared for Ryan's reaction. Ryan was upset about being taken away from home. Even though he understood that our parents had failed to protect him, they were still the only parents he had ever known. He was also angry at Hector and me for involving authorities, saying that we had made everything worse by bringing outsiders into family business. Ryan is currently staying with our maternal grandmother, who lives about an hour away. Grandma had been mostly out of touch with our family for the past few years because of some disagreement with our parents that we never fully understood. Now we're learning that the disagreement might have been related to Grandma's concerns about Uncle Pete. Grandma told us that she had noticed Pete acting inappropriately around children at family gatherings years ago, and she had mentioned her concerns to our parents. They had gotten angry with her and accused her of causing drama, and gradually stopped inviting her to family events. So our parents had not only ignored their children's safety, but they had also cut off a family member who had tried to warn them about Pete's behavior. They had isolated anyone who might have supported Hector or questioned Pete's presence in our home. Living with Hector has been good for me, but it's also been difficult. Hector is dealing with a lot of anger about the years he lost and the way our parents treated him. Some days he's fine, but other days he gets very quiet and doesn't want to talk about anything related to the family. Hector has been going to counseling, which is helping him process everything that happened. His counselor told him that what our parents did was not just neglect, but active psychological abuse designed to make him question his own reality and memory. I've been struggling with my own feelings about our parents. Before all this came out, I had a normal relationship with them. I trusted them, I enjoyed spending time with them, and I thought they were good parents who were just dealing with a difficult situation with Hector. Now I look back at my childhood and see all the ways they controlled information and manipulated situations to protect their preferred narrative. They didn't just fail to protect Hector and Ryan, they actively worked against their own children to protect a predator. Last week, our parents reached out through a family friend, asking if Hector and I would meet with them to discuss the situation. They said they wanted to apologize and try to work things out as a family. Hector didn't want to meet with them at all, but I was curious about what they would say. We agreed to meet at a neutral location with Hector's lawyer present. The meeting was awful. Our parents spent most of the time trying to minimize what had happened and making excuses for their actions. Dad said that Pete had convinced them that Hector was having psychological problems, and that they had been trying to get Hector help rather than punishing him. Mom cried and said that they had been doing what they thought was best for the family, and that they never intended for anyone to get hurt. She said that they had been hoping that Pete would get help or that the situation would resolve itself without having to involve outsiders. But then Dad said something that showed us they still didn't understand the severity of what they had done. He said that Hector and I were being unfair by involving police and social workers, and that we were hurting Ryan by breaking up the family over something that was already in the past. Hector's lawyer had to stop Hector from walking out of the meeting. Hector told our parents that they had spent years calling him a liar and trying to make him think he was crazy, and that they were still more concerned about their reputation than about what had happened to their children. I asked them directly why they had never considered that Hector might be telling the truth. Mom said that Pete was family, and that it was hard to believe someone you trust could do something so terrible. Dad said that Hector had been having behavioral problems anyway, so when Pete said Hector was making things up, it seemed to fit with the other issues Hector was having. That's when I realized they were never going to take full responsibility for what they had done. In their minds, they were victims of a difficult situation rather than adults who had failed to protect their children. The meeting ended with our parents asking what they could do to repair the relationship. Hector told them that there was nothing they could do, because they had proven that their love and support was conditional on their children not causing problems for them. I told them that they had taught me that their comfort was more important than their children's safety, and that I couldn't trust them to put my well-being first in any situation. We haven't spoken to them since that meeting. The criminal case against Pete is moving forward, and there's a possibility that our parents could also face charges for their role in covering up the abuse. Ryan is adjusting to living with Grandma, but he's still struggling with the changes. He wants to come home, but he also doesn't want to be around Uncle Pete anymore. It's difficult for him to understand that Pete is gone but that home still isn't safe because our parents can't be trusted to protect him. Hector and I visit Ryan every weekend, and we're working on building a relationship with him that isn't influenced by our parents' manipulation. It's slow progress, but Ryan is starting to understand that Hector was trying to protect him all along. The hardest part of this whole situation is accepting that the family I thought I had never really existed. My parents weren't the caring, protective people I believed them to be. They were people who would sacrifice their children's well-being to avoid dealing with difficult truths. Hector lost years of his life to their selfishness and cowardice. Ryan was victimized because they chose to ignore warning signs and remove the protections Hector had tried to put in place. And I grew up believing that my troubled brother was the source of our family's problems when he was actually the only one trying to keep us safe. I don't know what the future holds for our relationships with our parents or with each other. But I'm grateful that the truth finally came out, and that Pete can't hurt anyone else in our family. Update 3. This will be my final update on this situation. A lot has been resolved, though not in the way I initially hoped it might be. The criminal case against Uncle Pete concluded 2 months ago. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison after pleading guilty to multiple charges related to what he did to Hector and Ryan. The prosecutor told us that Pete's confession included details about other children he had abused over the years, including the neighbor's child from the previous complaint that had been dropped. Hector testified at the sentencing hearing. He spoke clearly and calmly about the impact Pete's actions had on his life, and about how our parents' refusal to believe him had made the trauma worse. The judge commended Hector for his courage in coming forward and for collecting the evidence that made the case possible. Pete's sentencing brought some closure, but it also highlighted how much damage had been done by years of cover-ups and denial. Our parents were not charged criminally, but they are facing a civil lawsuit that Hector's lawyer filed on behalf of both Hector and Ryan. The lawsuit alleges that our parents failed in their duty to protect their children and actively enabled the abuse by silencing Hector and removing safety measures he had put in place. The civil case has been difficult because it's forced our parents to confront the specifics of what they did and didn't do. During depositions, it became clear that they had made a series of deliberate choices to protect Pete rather than investigate Hector's claims. For example, when Hector first told them about Pete, instead of asking Pete to stay elsewhere while they figured out what was happening, they sent Hector away. When Hector returned and tried to protect Ryan by giving him a door lock, they removed the lock and punished Hector for being paranoid. When teachers and other adults expressed concern about Hector's behavior, our parents actively worked to discredit Hector rather than consider that his behavior might be a response to trauma. The depositions also revealed that our parents had received more warnings about Pete than they had admitted to us. In addition to Grandma's concerns, Dad's ex-wife had called Mom years ago to say that Pete had made her uncomfortable around her children. A neighbor had also mentioned that Pete seemed to pay unusual attention to the kids on the block. Our parents had dismissed all of these warnings as gossip or jealousy, and they had never told Hector, Ryan, or me that other people had expressed concerns about Pete. Ryan has been living with Grandma for 6 months now, and he's doing much better. He's in counseling and has been able to talk through what happened to him. He's also started to understand that Hector was trying to protect him, and their relationship has improved significantly. Ryan will probably continue living with Grandma until he graduates from high school. He doesn't want to move back in with our parents, and honestly, I don't think it would be safe for him even if Pete is in prison. Hector is also doing better. The counseling has helped him work through his anger and trauma, and he's been able to focus on rebuilding his life rather than just surviving. He got promoted at his job and is considering going back to school to finish his degree. Most importantly, Hector no longer carries the burden of knowing that Ryan was in danger and being unable to protect him. That weight had been crushing him for years, and now that Ryan is safe and knows the truth, Hector can finally start healing. As for my relationship with our parents, I made the decision to cut contact with them completely. After the civil lawsuit was filed, they reached out to me several times asking me to convince Hector to drop the case. They said that the lawsuit was tearing the family apart and that we should handle these issues privately rather than in court. That request showed me that they still didn't understand what they had done wrong. They were more concerned about the public exposure and financial consequences than about the years of trauma they had caused their children. The final straw came when Mom called me crying, saying that the stress of the lawsuit was affecting Dad's health and that I was being cruel by supporting Hector's decision to pursue legal action. She said that they had made mistakes, but that continuing to punish them wouldn't help anyone heal. I told her that Hector wasn't punishing them, he was seeking accountability for the choices they had made. I also told her that their health and stress levels were not my responsibility, especially considering that they had never shown similar concern for Hector's well-being during the years when he was being abused and gaslit. That conversation made it clear to me that our parents were never going to take full responsibility for what they had done. They would always see themselves as victims of a difficult situation rather than adults who had failed to protect their children. I blocked their phone numbers and social media accounts. I haven't spoken to them in 3 months, and I don't plan to resume contact. Some extended family members have told me that I'm being too harsh, and that our parents made mistakes but they still love us. These relatives think that family forgiveness is more important than holding people accountable for their actions. But I've learned that love without protection is meaningless. Our parents may have loved us in their own way, but when it mattered most, they chose their comfort over our safety. They chose Pete's word over Hector's truth. They chose their reputation over Ryan's well-being. Hector, Ryan, and I have formed our own small family unit. We have Sunday dinners together at Grandma's house, we text regularly, and we're there for each other in ways our parents never were. It's not the family I grew up thinking I had, but it's a family built on truth and mutual support rather than on maintaining comfortable lies. Hector recently told me that for the first time in years, he sleeps through the night without nightmares. Ryan is doing well in school and has made friends in his new town. I'm finishing my degree and have a good relationship with both of my brothers. We're all healing from what happened, but we're doing it together and honestly. We don't have to pretend that abuse didn't happen or that our parents' failures were acceptable mistakes. The civil lawsuit is still ongoing, but regardless of the outcome, Hector has already achieved what he wanted most. His brothers are safe, the truth is known, and Pete can't hurt anyone else. I wanted to write this final update to let everyone know that it is possible to build something good from the wreckage of a toxic family situation. It's not easy, and it requires making some hard choices about who deserves to be in your life. But sometimes cutting ties with people who refuse to acknowledge the harm they've caused is the only way to protect your own healing and build relationships based on trust and genuine care. Thank you to everyone who followed this story and offered support and advice. It meant more than you know during a very difficult time.